excited to share my perspective, but almost don't want to break the fantastic reflective mood that I think Sissy has created.
Yes.
But I think I will. But hopefully, it's a very different context for creativity, and I suppose that's the point about all of this: finding all the different places that creativity can find a voice. So I'm just going to share some slides. Oh, I think for some reason that's not worked. I'm just going to stop that. Try again. One more time.
Perfect.
Right, hopefully that's better. We can see it. Great. Okay. So I'm going to talk about collaboration, but collaboration to generate new ideas, I suppose, in the world of innovation, and how vital the contribution of creative practice is in that. And I think more than anything, for me, it's about really recognizing that we need to foster curiosity in each other's practices as the precursor to that collaboration, because collaboration is hard. And I suppose I was reflecting very much during Sissy's presentation also on how there are so many barriers to understanding, be it around sort of language or ideas or even values. And so collaboration, I think we have to reflect, is phenomenally hard, but very powerful when we get it right. My creative practice, I suppose, I was trained as a designer. So my creative practice very much focused on practical outcomes, you could say, more than self-expression. But these days, I struggle to know how to describe myself because perhaps, again, as Sissy was referring, I'm trained as a designer, and it was my practice for 20 years. But these days, I suppose I think of myself as an innovator, and I'll explain more about that in a second. So someone focused on helping identify the great ideas that might improve the world around us, the lives that we live, but also helping to put those ideas into practice. So the good news, I think, is this is an important mission, is something that's increasingly seen as one where creative people are key. And really, to be frank, this was not always the case. In the 20th century, especially, we designers, I think, were historically sort of characterized as only interested in probably the rather superficial issues of vanity and consumption. And that's reasonable, perhaps, because so much of design was linked to industry and consumption. But then it was the scientists and the technologists and the financiers and the lawyers and the politicians who are perceived as those who have the authority to change the world. But I really do think that's different these days. I was 15 years at a company called IDEO, a global sort of design and innovation company. And we played our part. We helped to promote the idea of design thinking as a movement that could persuade business leaders and policymakers that this sort of human-centered form of creativity that is the best design was vital in solving some of the most important challenges and pressing challenges that we face. And then, of course, leading educators, promoted the idea, especially in North America, that the liberal arts, that might be represented by the letter A, must be added to the science, technology, engineering, and maths of STEM and to form STEAM. Or more recently in the UK, the concept of the creative industries, computer games, film, advertising, publishing, architecture. It's a pretty broad church, which pre-pandemic at least were growing faster than most other sectors. So this, of course, is nothing new. Brighton is the home of the Brighton Fuse Research Report of 2013, which sort of proved the power of fusing technology and creativity. Not a new idea, but still, I think it has been amazing how few people have widely understood the role of creativity in driving sort of innovation forward, how important, cultural activities are not just sort of separate by themselves. They must be fused with industry. And so it's this ability of creatively trained people, I think always, which is so powerful in imagining these futures, to look beyond what currently is, to do something, to imagine something better. Because so often people are sort of taught to think incrementally, but I think creative people can have great creative leaps. And actually, also remarkably, I think this can often take a level of naivety. People who have limited experience in any industry or sector are not constrained by the existing thinking and the existing practices. So these creative practices really matter. And creative people must recognize their abilities actually to contribute to these amazing futures. The problem, I think, is that it can actually be so hard to have the confidence to contribute to these foreign worlds. You know, when I worked with the National Health Service and the Department for Health in this country, or the Home Office, and I'll refer to this later on, I was sort of dealing with policymakers. I was thinking, what do I know about crime? What do I know about the large-scale health systems? But again, it was my naivety and the people I was collaborating with that could bring the new ideas to these places. So I thought that, look, one way to start with this is, and one way you can build confidence, is to see role models and pioneers, you know, those that have gone before. So I thought, let me give you 4 examples of fantastic designers, people trained as designers who are sort of innovators and sometimes sort of company chief executives now, that we've supported at PlusX over the past sort of 7 years or so. So firstly, on the left, we've got Lauren Bell. So she's sort of entered the world of healthcare innovation. Why? Because within her family, there are awful cases of eczema, and she knew that the current medical devices weren't good enough. So she's a graduate of Brunel University, a designer by training, and she's created products in a company called Cozy Care, which, you know, offers a range of fantastic eczema care devices, and she's going from strength to strength. On the right-hand side, we've got Lucy Hughes, product design graduate of Sussex University. And she, of course, is very concerned about single-use plastics, especially the transparent films that you find on kind of food packaging. So she's created Marinatex, you know, which is creating bioplastic from fish waste and from algae. Or 2 others. On the left, we've got Amrit, and next to him, on the left, we've got Carlton, and to his right, we've got Amrit. Now, Carlton is a graduate of sort of design for sustainability at Brunel University. And he and Amrit have created Acceleron, which is an amazing business looking at the reuse of lithium-ion batteries. Because let's face it, as wonderful as lithium-ion batteries may be in dealing with some of our sustainable energy storage challenges, to recycle lithium-ion batteries is difficult, and there's an awful lot that can be done with reuse. And I won't go into how they do it, but it's just a fantastically simple and wonderful creative idea that has spawned an amazing business. And then on the right, we've got Rob and Rowan. These guys were trained as graphic designers at Kingston University, and they've taken potato waste and are turning it into bioplastic. So for me, this is just amazing that these people who are all trained as product designers or graphic designers or something like that are now doing things that you probably wouldn't have imagined they might be doing. But also importantly, I think, is while they've had the imagination to consider something, and again, like I said, the naivety to imagine that they could sort of create novel materials, at the same time, they can't do it by themselves. So one of the things we used to talk about a lot at IDEO, was the way in which no single skill set is enough. You need to bring together the worlds of design, yes, but also the worlds of business and the world of technology. And actually bringing this diverse thinking together is remarkably difficult, because everyone has very different language, very different values, very different processes, very different ways of thinking. But you have to do it. You have to confront it. There is no other way to do it. So, for instance, you know, Rob and Rowan and others, you know, would be recruiting material scientists in order to drive their business forward. They created a commercial partnership between McCain, who make all those chips, and their company, because of course McCain has got so much potato waste. They're ideal for dealing with that waste stream and turning it into, you know, biodegradable plastics. So again, this form of collaboration is incredibly important, but collaboration is not easy, and we've got all these different ways of working, as I say. But actually, maybe the first question would be, how do I even find people to collaborate with in the first place? Now, one way in which you do that is you go and place yourself in a city, because there you might bump into people, right? And so the general theory always was, go to the big city, you'll find so many diverse people to collaborate with. That's the best way to get going. And indeed, the city where I started, God knows how many years ago, early 90s, was San Francisco, because Silicon Valley had become this rich place where you got Stanford University joined by a kind of government research institute, Stanford Research Institute, then a corporate research institute, Xerox Park, the Palo Alto Research Center. Then you had Hewlett Packard as a sort of a corporate entity. We had the venture capitalists of Sand Hill Road. And then we began to get the people in the garages, the spin outs from Hewlett Packard and all the others building these amazing startups. So it was quite a journey, but it was this amazing place to be. And at least when I went in the early 90s, what had happened was many designers had started to come in there, many of them European, actually, from the 80s onwards, in order to consumerize the digital world. And that's really why we have all these consumer digital products now, because the creative people came in to create the brands and the consumer experiences to match with the engineers. So it was a very rich mix these days. But over the past 20 years, what's happened is that, it's gone beyond San Francisco, right, to New York and Paris and London. But also what's really important is that if you take London, where 20, 30 years ago, we would have had innovation happening in a science park outside of London, the places where only the scientists go, no creative people. Now what's happening is that the innovation districts are sort of happening in the center of town. And this is important, of course, because that's where the creative lives. So we all have heard, I'm sure, those of us that understand innovation in the UK and London of Silicon Roundabout, which was East London, Shoreditch. And the point is that was a relatively inexpensive bit of town where many creative people lived. And then side by side with the software coders, you begin to create this great mixture of the designers and the technologists, as I say, and also the business people. And so now with the innovation districts like in King's Cross, we've got Central St. Martin's just outside on the right of the picture, as well as UCL. You've got Google and Facebook as anchor corporates. You've got the venture capitalists, Balderton just south of here, Local Globe just north. And you've got the Crick Institute, that building in the sort of the mid left is a sort of premier scientific research institute that normally would have been out of town in a science park. So, it's definitely happening in these cities where we're getting this rich mix of creativity as well as science, as well as business. But actually for me, what is even more important now is this is spreading beyond London. This is a chart from a place called the Connected Places Catapult, and it's looking there at sort of the UK regional cities and where we're seeing all of these sort of innovation districts. And the reason why they're growing is because government, of course, wants to see thriving communities and well-paid jobs. Big business wants to collaborate with universities and startups. Universities want to train knowledge and commercialize ideas. Small businesses want to grow, and communities want rewarding work. In other words, if this is kind of high value jobs, then why wouldn't we do that? Because we deserve to have really exciting jobs everywhere in the company and well-paid jobs in the country, and every well-paid jobs as well. So that's, I suppose, why I'm based in Brighton, because after my career in design, I decided to get involved in the support for entrepreneurs, for innovators and entrepreneurs. And so we build innovation hubs. This particular one was very ably supported by many people in Brighton, including Nick Hibbert, that's going to be joining us for the panel session later. So, we say now we're creating innovation hubs. To some extent, it's just an office building, but actually it's the way we sort of create a fantastic community of diverse perspectives and voices and practices, I think, that really matters, because ultimately what we're trying to do is grow great ideas to make sort of local economies more resilient and create some fantastic jobs at the same time. So how would you do this? Well, the first thing you would do, of course, is design a fantastic building. This was designed by Studio Egret West. Lucas Lawrence actually studied at the University of Brighton. So this building screams creativity. It's a fantastic place to be, focused on well-being, and it just hopefully makes everyone think bigger. But certainly it makes them bump into one another, because there's a kitchen or roof deck or an event space all over the place. So it's intentionally designed for people to bump together and to be able to collaborate. And more than that, it's got physical infrastructure in there, so you can make things, because as we all know, with diverse practices, some people think by talking or just sitting and mulling things over. Some people think by making. And ultimately, making physical things is incredibly important, especially when we're dealing with issues of climate change or healthcare, as we'll come on to later. But not all making is physical. A lot of making is digital. So we've got podcasting studios, VR suites, that kind of stuff. Just the stuff where people can begin to experiment and collaborate. And again, sometimes communicating with one another can be through talking in this kind of space or making things side by side and showing them to people. And then beyond that, of course, actually, as I've referred to already, connecting with academics is important. And so we were delighted to be able to be supported by Coaster Capital and in partnership with the University of Brighton, because then we enable all the great thoughts and ideas that are in the university, and we connect it with all of the businesses as well. So really trying to create as diverse a community as possible in terms of its practices and its knowledge and the way in which it and the things it's trying to deal with. And so now we've got a community of about, getting towards 400 people. The building when full will be about 600 people. But not only, I'm not going to read all those things out there. Those are all, some of the people that are in the building. They're very, very broad. But for me, what was incredibly important is that, we opened in June 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. And 18 months later, our main spaces are nearly 90% full. The community is buzzing. And the reason why throughout the pandemic, we were able to grow our community month on month is partly because we were able to operate the space very safely. But actually, each person was inspired by the positivity and the resilience of another, sharing connections, sharing ideas, sharing practical support, trading with each other, forming new companies together, providing skills, or just simple reassurance. Absolutely, this was a stressful and difficult time, but it was creating that critical mass was so important because, of course, Brighton is a relatively small space. So in theory, you can bump into people. But actually, what do we mean by critical mass? Actually, being in the same building, tripping over one another as one moves up through the building or goes down to the cafe. This is the kind of stuff that really creates those tight bonds and those tight connections, the forms of trust. So I suppose really, as I sort of get to the end of this, sort of two final thoughts really. One message, I suppose, is fairly simple. If you are not part of a diverse set of communities, then perhaps you're missing out. If you consider yourself to be a creative practitioner, do you spend time with technologists and business thinkers, organizational design experts? Do you connect with students and research academics? How diverse are the practices in your networks? So whether it's through the talks and events put on by Always Possible, Wired Sussex, Platform 9, or Plus X, all the business support from University of Brighton, to name just a few things in the city of Brighton, there is so much to explore. The argument I would make is too often we don't push outside of our comfort zones and really start to collaborate with people whose languages we probably don't even understand. And then I suppose finally, to end with one final thought, is perhaps more of a question or a hope. One way diverse folks align is through a common cause, clearly. And for me, an innovation challenge is a great mechanism. For those of you that don't know, innovation challenges are saying, well, let's solve this problem. Who's up for it, really? It's as simple as that. It can come from government, it can come from industry. I led challenges as Chief Design Officer at the Design Council on improving health. That's why I work with the Department of Health. Reducing crime. That's why I work with the Home Office. Gaining employment and giving babies the best start in life. It's an amazing way to get new people with new teams coming together. And let's face it, we've got more challenges than ever before facing us, and we've just come through an amazing challenge that showed the power of collaboration, I think, and collective action. And Brighton as a creative and technical cluster, I think, has the power to generate world-beating ideas for the big issues of our time. So for me, what is our collective call to action? We know what, climate change, plastic pollution, rethinking social care, transforming the high streets. I think we could really rally around very clear challenges like this. And more than that, it's not just that Brighton has a fabulous range of creative leaders, technologists, and business leaders. But of course, these challenges here require a very systemic response and a very practical and physical response. Single point solutions, theoretical solutions aren't enough. How better to experiment with systems than in a city? So Brighton and Hove, for me, should be a place of innovation, not just because it's got the talent, but that as a small city, it can be used as a place to try things out and to kind of grow the best solutions. So ultimately, I suppose I was intrigued by these sessions, the conversations that might ensue, trying to ignite action. And so I readily agreed to come along, and I really look forward to the discussion we're going to have and hopefully to see what happens afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And I think one of the positives of our region is we are we are spoilt with the amount of groups and communities and conversations that are happening. And I think sometimes it can be quite daunting. Again, I'm going to go with my eternal trying to be positive about lockdown. For a lot of people, it meant they could dial into conversations. They could be walk into a virtual room and kind of build their confidence up. And I think for creatives, it is those baby steps, isn't it? Especially if you're working by yourself, you're freelancing, coming to co-working days, coming to events, and just finding your tribe. You know, we have lots of co-working spaces in Brighton Hove. They have different flavors, different communities. Find the one that fits with you.
And I think to your point, it's so important, but also find some other tribes you could collaborate with. But as you say, I think it's such an important point. What is the simplest, safest way for me to try it out and not feel intimidated and not feel it's inappropriate that I can join them because I'm not obviously from their tribe?